Hello my viewers, welcome to the first video of 2024. I present to you today a script tutorial all about multi-choices. This time we have 5 things to cover. First we're going to cover accessing and editing data in the multi-choice table. Once we can do that, we can differentiate the 3 multi-choice commands. Afterwards, we will set up the framework that most scripts use with multi-choice commands. This is where we start scripting. Once that's done, we will test our scripts in an emulator, and we will close off with some of the multi-choices limitations. Note, there are scrolling multi-choices in Pokemon Emerald, but those are more complicated and volatile that they deserve their own tutorial. You might be wondering what this image is all about. Well, in the late 2000s, multi-choices weren't as well known as they are today, so people like Destin Gold had to use yes-no boxes as substitutes for when they want to make more complicated answer choices. After watching this tutorial, you'll be able to make boxes that allow the player to select more than 2 options, as well as options that don't say either yes nor no. Let the tutorial begin. We will start with everything you need to know about the multi-choice table in the Game Boy Advance games. So the first thing we need to do is locate this table in HMA, so that we can find all the text strings the game uses to present the player with multiple options to pick from. So what you can do in this go-to text box is type the prefix multi and then the word choice after it, no spaces. Afterwards, what you want to do is click scripts and then you will find the table of interest. You will want to click text.multichoice, not text.scrolling. That is something beyond the scope of this tutorial. And now you'll be presented with the table that multiple commands use in Overworld scripts. You can click on any one of them in this table. That's not a good example. Let's say this one. This one is used in one of the game's harbors, to let the player decide which town to go to. There are some existing entries in this table that you might not want to use in your ROM hack. You can edit them if you want. For example, this one, which is related to a battle facility. As you can see on the left panel, there are 5 options in the slot. I could use this to repurpose this so that an NPC can have the player pick from 5 different moves to teach to their Pokemon. I can go into these individual text boxes and replace them with moves like Ice Punch, Fire Punch, and Dynamic Punch. Notice on the top right it says that some data was automatically moved to another ROM address. You don't need to worry about that. Hex Maniac Advance automatically takes care of repointing data to deal with space issues. Now, if you have a text box that says on top, this is used by 4 pointers or some other number, do not edit them, as editing it in one place will edit it in other places without your permission. What you should do is click repoint in either all or this one. For this option, I will just click this one. I did the same for the other shared option. Now what I can do is safely rename these last 2 options to Thunder Punch and Mach Punch respectively. Now we have a template of 5 options that we can use in a script that would be associated with an NPC move tutor. But what if we wanted more options, or even just one more, like a cancel option so the player doesn't have to press the B button? What I can do is change this count option, which is the number right after the blue pointer, to 6, so that I can have 6 options instead of 5. Notice that the list of pointers to text data got repointed as well. We don't need to worry about that. The new option will always be a duplicate of the option above it, which is Mach Punch in this case. Note that if I were to set the count value back to 5, the last option will be automatically removed. Like the former info and exit options, I will need to click repoint this one again, so that I can give the final option a unique name. If you decide not to expand existing multi-choices, what you can do is expand the table itself, so that you can add more slots. Something you might not know about the table tool is that you can select this 1 like you would in a text box and add 1 new, and type 7 so that you can add 7 new entries at a time. Similar to what you have seen before, you will now have several copies of whatever the last item of the table is. It is up to you to repoint each individual copy and fill in the information yourself. You will see another alert on the top right, but it won't affect anything in your game, I promise. This is one instance where I selected repoint all to deal with the duplicate items in the table, so that I can use all of these new additions for completely different purposes. We will go back to this once we get ready to actually make our script in the game. Before going any further, it is really important to make backups of your ROM often, so that you're not punished for making mistakes. To do this, click File and click Export Backup. Type something to distinguish this backup from other backups, and hit OK. You have just backed up your ROM and your metadata, aka the .toml file. In the folder where your ROM hack is loaded, you will see a backups folder. Double-click to open it, and first what I need to do is sort by date created as opposed to size. But you will see the backup of the ROM and the .toml file that we just created here. Make sure that the GBA and the .toml files are in sync with each other, or else you will run into metadata issues. Now that we know how the multi-choice table works, we should now distinguish the commands that require information from that table. In the background, I'm going to have footage of me setting up the 3 scenarios that will be illustrated in a moment. The games have 3 commands that are used to show multiple choice boxes that the player can pick one option from. The first one is called Multichoice, which is just a standard version that you will see in 99% of scripts. Here is what one of the boxes would look like on screen. The second one is just called Multichoice 2, and it functions the same way as the first one, but you could set the cursor to point at a different option instead of the first one. The third one is called Multichoice Grid or Multichoice 3, and it works a little differently. Instead of a single column of answer choices, you can put multiple options on one row to minimize space. Multi-choice grids are a little bit harder to set up, so I'll demonstrate making one separately from the other 2 commands. We can now put everything we have learned so far into making a full script that will show the player a multi-choice. I will go over all of the commands that you will need to use in conjunction with these commands. The first part of the setup for this demonstration is making an NPC that will contain the script. So I'm going to go to Rustboro City, which is in Bank 0. And I will drag an NPC template from the top of the screen and put it right over there. Let's make him a schoolboy that looks to the right. This NPC will ask the player a question about another video game that I love playing, Bloons Tower Defense 6. I'll click this plus button to give this NPC an actual script address, and you can already see 4 commands that were filled in by HMA. We will go back to this shortly, but what we need to do is go back to the multi-choice table. So I click this house button, and I follow the same steps that we did earlier in the video. Here we will scroll until we find the bottom of the table, and I'm going to select one of the multi-choice slots that we just created, and that's a duplicate of like 6 others. Also, pay attention to the ID of the multi-choice slot, and you can see that right here. In this case, it's 116. You're going to need to know this for when we actually make the script. I actually want this multi-choice to have 4 options instead of 5, so I'm going to go to the count field on the left side of the screen and change the 5 to 4. The necessary data gets removed on its own. These 4 text strings are also shared by other multi-choice slots, so I'm going to have to click repoint and this one for each and every one of them. Now we can decide on our answer choices. There are a couple of challenges you can do in Bloons TD6 every week in the event that the main game mode gets stale. If you don't know what any of these are, it's totally okay. This is mostly a Pokemon channel after all. Anyways, the 4 options I have in mind are bosses, odysseys, races, and contested territories. 3 of these challenges are highly competitive, and you can usually get good rewards if you participate in any of them. Depending on which option the player selects, the NPC will say a unique message. As a reminder, this ID is 116 and we're going to use this very soon, like right now. Notice that the text strings that we just made are actually below the script in the Hex content viewer. No need to worry about that, we'll make sure that the script will be in one piece, more or less. So right in between the lock and face player commands, and the release and end commands, this is where we will start our skeleton code. Since he will talk to the player and provide options at the same time, we will start with prepare MSG, and pressing space will provide a pointer to text automatically. I'll follow this up with a pair of braces or curly brackets, and I can type the text data of choice within the script editor. The question I want this NPC to ask the player is, what do you like to play in Bloons Tower Defense 6? Which does break the 4th wall, but I'll let it slide. After the prepare message method, I will put the wait message command so that all the text has to be drawn on the screen before anything else can happen. For the next line, I'm going to put multi, the prefix, and then the word choice, no spaces. I'm going to use the top one, but you can use multi-choice too. It's just you'll have to add an extra argument. The x and y parameters determine the location of the box. 0 for the x and 0 for the y mean the top left corner. Increase the x value to move the box to the right, and increase the y value to move the box further down. You might not get the desired placement of the box on the screen on the first try, and that's okay. The next parameter is the list parameter, and this is the ID of the multi-choice that you had to memorize. For this example, the ID was 116. We now have two options here, allow cancel or forbid cancel. Allow cancel means that you're able to not select anything by pressing the B button, while forbid cancel means you must press one of the listed options. I was going to go for forbid cancel, but I went for the other one, because that has an extra step I want to show you. What we need after this is the close on key press command. To make these options meaningful, we have to make the code branch out to other sections. And we're going to do this with many if.compare.goto macros. In the games, whenever a person selects an option from a yes-no box or any multi-choice box, the variable called varResult gets assigned a number. So thus for the variable field, we can use varResult. Next, we'll use two equal signs. You can use other operators depending on the multi-choice and what you want to do with it, but you're most likely going to use the two equal signs. And the first option will always be index 0. The last thing we're going to need in this line is a pointer to more script code. And instead of specifying an address, we can use a less than sign, section 1, and a greater than sign. To round out the last three options, I'm going to copy and paste this line of code 3 more times. I also need to fix the indentation. Let me do that real quick. So I have code for 4 options here, but I'm going to copy and paste once again for a 5th option. Here's why. Remember this allow cancel token here? It allows us to click the B button to escape the multi-choice and thus set the value of varResult to 127. So thus I want there to be some different code for if the player presses the B button instead of one of the 4 options. Now I'm going to change the duplicate section numbers so that they go from section 1 to section 5. And for the line that contains the pointer to section 5, I'm going to change the 0 to 127. The last adjustment to this section of code will be so that the code checks for all 4 options instead of just the first one, which is 0. Likewise, the second option corresponds to the number 1, while the third option corresponds to the number 2, fourth option number 3, and the pattern would continue. This is all the code you would need for nothing to happen afterwards. In other words, we have a working multi-choice, but we need to actually do something with it. To start off, underneath all of this code, I'm going to put section 1 and a colon, and we can put whatever commands we want. I will use msgbox.autoclose to display a message. Below it, I'm going to put 2 braces, an open one and a closed one, and I'll put some sample text here for now that I will fill in later. There's also another alert that tells me that our script data got repointed. It happened seamlessly, and it made sure that an unrelated text string did not get overwritten. All I need afterwards are the release and end commands, and that's the framework for each section. And now I'm going to copy and paste this 4 more times, and I will rename the section so that there's one of each section number that we alluded to earlier. Now for our purposes, we will just have the NPC say something different based on what option choice was selected, but you can get more advanced than this. According to the code we made earlier, section 1 corresponds to option number 0, which is the first option. And if you remembered, it was bosses. For this section, I'll have the NPC respond with cool, I love playing the weekly boss events too. Because out of all the weekly events in that game, I find that the most enjoyable. Those don't take too much time, and they're not too infuriating to play. Section 2 corresponds to the second option, which was Odysseys, and the NPC will say something slightly different, but state that Odysseys take quite a long time to complete. If your script has a lot of commands and text strings, you might experience a lot of lag when typing. The third option was Races. In response to the player clicking this option, the NPC will say that he loses these challenges all the time, and that he's starstruck whenever other players play a lot more optimally than him. I was originally going to use a period here, but I'll actually put a backslash before it to get the 3 dots. Once that's taken care of, I can write the message that the NPC will say for the 4th option, which was contested territories. Since I haven't played them before and thus don't have opinions on them, I'll project this lack of information to the NPC. You might think we're done, but don't forget we have a 5th option to account for just in case the player presses the B button and does not select anything. In the event this does happen, I'll just have the NPC say a unique message, like one where he says that the player is actually not a fan of the game. I'll also have the NPC say it was nice to meet you though afterwards. Whether or not I need a comma between the words you and though, that's up to you to decide in the comments below. I'm a know it and I didn't even poet. So now we have skeleton code for a generic multi-choice NPC script. As the buns of our burger, we have lock and face player, as well as release and end after every section, as well as the main one, which in hindsight wasn't necessary, but is not a bad practice to have. We then have prepare message and wait message commands to show a message to the player, while allowing this command to show a multi-choice box on screen. We then have close on key press to make both things disappear after making a choice. And then we have at most one if.compare.goto command macro for each option choice. They determine which answer choice was selected and what to do based on the information. Each section also has different code to accommodate for any answer choice that the player selects. If I changed allow cancel to forbid cancel, I wouldn't need this line that checks for if the B button was selected or if option number 127 was selected. But since I did want it, I'll set it back to allow. The script is complete, but here's one caveat. If I click back off and click back onto the script, you will see these two macros. This is only a visual difference, and the game is alright with this whatsoever, but this inconsistency in commands is visually unappealing. The reason why this happens will be shown on screen, and you can pause the video to read through all of it. Fortunately, there's a workaround. After close on key press, you can type copy var, and then var followed by any number from 0 through B. I'll go with var9, and then you type var result. It will essentially make it so that your answer choice is also stored in var9, or whatever temporary variable you used. And then you change all other instances of var result to the new variable number, and I'll do some copying and pasting to replace the macros with the new stuff, so that you see 5 if.compare.goto commands instead of 3. Once again, if I click back off and click back on the script again, this time you won't see any inconsistencies with the if.compare.goto macros. So real quick, I'm going to make another NPC that does the same thing, but I'll quickly demonstrate using Multichoice 3 instead of Multichoice. So I'm just going to drag down another NPC, and I'll give him a different sprite, and I'll make a new address for him. For this script, I'm going to do the same thing again, where I use prepare message, wait message, multi-choice, and all of that stuff. But I'll keep the text string short and simple, as it's basically going to be a near clone of the other NPC. I'm going to use a different command though, multi-choice grid, which allows the options to be presented in a rectangle as opposed to a bulleted list of sorts. I'm going to try to place it in the bottom right corner, so I'll just use 12 for X and Y as a means of eyeballing it. For the list parameter, I'm going to use the same ID as the last one, which is 116, just to save time. I want the options to show up in a 2x2 grid, so I'll configure it to show 2 options per row. And this time I'm going to use forbid cancel for the last parameter. And like last time, I'm going to use the copy var command, so that it checks for var9 instead of var result. And we'll once again make the if.compare.goto command, but with var9 as the variable to check. We will check the equals operator, and we will start with the value 0, and we'll finish with a pointer to section 1. Now I'm going to copy and paste and make the same adjustments as last time, so that all 4 options are accounted for, and I will not check for the option number 127 because the player cannot press the B button in this script. Actually, in this case, we can remove the release and end after the if.compare.gotos because we don't actually need them. Because no matter what, you're going to one of those 4 sections. Just like before, I'm now going to define the 4 sections that we just made pointers to, and each of them is going to have a messagebox.autoclose command, a release command, and an end command. To save time, I'll just use sample text placeholder messages. I'm also going to do more copying and pasting. And for the finishing touches, I'll give each new section its own name, and I'll replace duplicate sample text 1s with sample text 2, 3, and 4. And that's all the basics of making scripts that involve multi-choices. The sky's the limit with these things, for the most part. You can make playthroughs go in many different directions with just a couple of these scripts. Let's start testing our creations in game. I've got the emulator ready to go. When we're testing, we're going to look for 2 major things. Do the multi-choices function, and do the boxes and the text look good? In MGBA, I'm going to hold down Ctrl and press 0 to load this ROM. Now that I'm outside in Rustboro City, I'm going to go down to the NPC that we first added to in the other objective and say hi to him. Here are the results. Both the message box and the multi-choice box show up. Although I'm not a fan of the placement of this multi-choice box, I kind of want it a bit more to the right. Also, I can fit the words Bloons TD6 onto the first line, so that's another change to the script that I would make. Let's now test the different outcomes. The message I get after clicking the B button shows up exactly how I expected it to. Let's try this again. I'm going to select bosses this time, and I'm happy with the message showing up properly and the text's line spacing. The same holds true for Odysseys and Races. Now I just have to test for one more thing, whether or not the code works for the contested territory option, and you won't believe this! Nah, I'm just kidding, it works as intended. Overall, this test was mostly a success. Our code functioned properly, and the visual adjustments I need to make are minimal. And that's okay, you won't always get everything to work on the first try. This is why it's important to test your own changes. The other NPC, on the other hand, the multi-choice box is really long, and it covers half of the message box. I definitely picked bad coordinates for this one. Also, I keep pressing the B button, and it's a good thing that nothing's happening. However, just like last time, each of the 4 options showed their correct message box, along with no other straggler command running when it shouldn't. I definitely need to change the positioning of this multi-choice box. The X coordinate won't do anything because this box is really long, but I can decrease the Y coordinate. Let's make some changes to try to make these multi-choice scripts better. Back in Hex Maniac Advance, I have my ROM loaded here as well. To access Rustboro City again, I'm going to click Maps, then Bank 0, and then the 1 button that shows up. Real quick, I'm going to scroll down to the first NPC and click this arrowhead to go to a script once again. First, I'm going to make a change to the opening message and put all of the text into one line. A lot of bytes changed position on the right panel, and that's totally fine. To move the multi-choice window to the right, I'm going to change the X coordinate, which is the first argument, to a number higher than 3, like 11. I'm not sure if that's the right number, but I can test to find out. I'm going to save changes here and double click on the other NPC that we created. I'm going to change the Y value to 1 to improve the vertical position of this box. As mentioned before, changing the X coordinate won't do anything in this case. Also, for demonstration purposes, I'm going to change this per row value to 4 so that you can see a row of options as opposed to a column of options. There are no other changes to make, so I'm going to save and reload the ROM. I'm also going to speed through the opening sequence. For the first NPC, you can now see that the box is on the right, and I can move it up a little bit and I can do more trial and error until the positioning is perfect. And all of the words in the message box fit in one line beautifully. For the other NPC, the box looks unrecognizable, but at least I can see the placeholder message. For the record, I can still scroll left or right to change which option I'm going to select, but this disaster of a multi-choice box prevents me from keeping track. To better showcase some things with the multi-choice grid command, I'm going to use a different multi-choice ID, like this one. I also made it show 2 choices per row again. Once again, I'm going to reload the ROM. Ah, screw you, PokeNav! I don't need to know about my car's extended warranty or whatever it is. Anyways, since each option has a similar number of characters, unlike the last multi-choice slot that I used, all 4 options show up without graphical glitches. Now here's what would happen if I change this 2 to a 3, a number that's not a factor of 4. You can see that only the first 3 options show up, and I cannot even select the 4th option that's supposed to be defined. As I've shown you, the multi-choice grid command is pretty volatile, so you'll need to keep an eye out for unintended effects. Lastly, we're going to talk about some limitations with these multi-choice commands, so that you don't accidentally mess up your game or cause any graphical glitches. The first one is that this table, where all the multi-choice slots are, is limited to 256 entries. As you can see, the last item of this table has an ID of 120. That means that there is a total of 121 elements in the table right now. I can only use this button so many times until I reach the limit. After that, you are out of luck. Over here, I have a sample script that shows a multi-choice, and the highest number I can type in the ID field is 255. If I go one higher, the input overflows to 0. I thought there could be a creative way to bypass this limit with some text macros. Like in this multi-choice slot, I replaced contested territory with \\\0b, which is a hard-coded substitute for max C in Emerald, but those kind of things don't show up in multi-choice text boxes. I added some text to the original message for some clarity. The next set of limitations involve how many multi-choice options you can put in a box at one time. All of them are listed on screen. Based on the leftmost two pictures, for the regular multi-choice and multi-choice 2 commands, only 9 options can fit on the screen because you're limited to a column of options, and you'll run into graphical glitches past 15 choices. I also decided to plug the HMA Discord. Anyways, if you want the player to have more options, your only option is to use the multi-choice grid command. Assuming each answer choice is just one character, you are limited to 104 options without graphical glitches, and at most 126 readable answer choices will show on screen. So in these regards, multi-choices are pretty generous with what the developer can do in their scripts. There is one more thing I'm going to cover, but honestly it is pretty minor. This is just another quirk with the multi-choice grid command that does not exist for the other 2 commands. In order for a grid box to show, you need a prepare message and a wait message command before, or you need to start your script with a lock and end your script with a release. Otherwise, you just won't see the multi-choice box. As for why this stipulation only exists for the multi-choice grid command, I honestly do not know. What I do know is that we're done with this tutorial. Thank you for sticking to the end of the video. You have learned all the ins and outs of making a situation where the player has to choose from one of multiple options to advance the story or something similar. Be mindful of the very few limitations with these commands, and you'll be able to spice up many of the scripts in your ROM hack. We have more tutorials that you can take a look at in the GitHub page, which I'll link in the description. And you can also join our Discord to ask us questions, showcase parts of your ROM hack, file bug reports, propose new features, and download resources from other HMA users. I don't think I will be releasing another Hex Maniac Advance video in the near future, because my winter break is coming to a close soon, but I'll do whatever I can to continue contributing to the software. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll be out of your way now.